the accessibility to the internet and social media that can create victimization for children it's kind of insane.
Sheriff, thank you for coming. I appreciate
Oh,
you.
thank you.
We were talking just before we turned the mics. There's a shift, and this is something I've been working with a lot of law enforcement agents and medical professionals on. There's a shift in risk associated with young people that you have seen it come onto the scene from a law enforcement standpoint, right? You started your law enforcement career a long time ago before social media had taken over.
Mm-hmm.
And now, obviously, everyone knows that like these hyper relevant and frequent crimes are committed against young people. Like, what do you see in the sheriff's department?
Kind of what we talked about a little bit earlier. The problem is there's so much accessibility for these kids. I mean, I'm not saying anything that nobody knows, right? The accessibility to the internet and social media that can create victimization for children it's kind of insane, right? Like I always say kids can look at porn on the bus now. They can chat with whoever they want, hiding under the covers at night while everyone's sleeping, and that's where the victimization comes in, because the naiveness of I'm talking to somebody in, Omaha, Nebraska, and I think that's cool. They don't have the education and the capacity to realize this is dangerous to me. Whereas in the old days, it was always some physical danger that was in front of them, right? You could educate kids on, when you see this car coming at you, you have to get out of the street, right? So because that makes sense. It's a physical thing that is endangering you, or even like stranger danger, right? It's a physical person coming towards you. You can see it. We're here in space, and they can be cautious against that. Well, now we're talking about, the setup to somebody coming into their space, and they don't understand the setup now, right? In years past, what are you going to do? Have a pen pal and invite them? That's not how that works. But now you can talk to somebody across the country, across the world in seconds, and be victimized in a matter of hours. So I think the education has become different with parents, where, back in the day, when I used to run a drug dog, and parents would call, I think my kid's on drugs, can you come and look in their room, that kind of thing. And we'd work with parents on, how that goes. And my advice to them was always, if you care about your kids, you really need to kind of snoop on them. Their bedroom can't just be considered a sanctuary. You need to know what's in here. Right. Don't jump in on them when they're in the bathroom and, surprise, that kind of thing. But you need to know what is in their space so that you can prevent, victimization. Right. So
is that, do you need to grab that?
No, I don't know. There, it's gone now.
Okay, good.
Boy, I could hear it.
Yeah, a little vibration.
But now we've changed to, it's not even you need to know what's in their space, right? You need to know what's on their phone. You need to know what's going across your internet connection, and educate them about that. So it's just, the game has just changed.
Right.
From, you might want to look through your kid's underwear drawer once in a while, see if there's a bag of weed in there, to, hey, look at these apps that you don't even know exist, because it changes so quickly, to make sure they don't become a victim.
Right. And again, talking about legacy safety, like we all know to tell our kids, hey, don't talk to people at the grocery store, right? Like if some weirdo comes up to you and we're like getting milk, like, no, don't talk, get away from my kid, right? You know how to talk to them at the park. It's like, you don't talk to strangers, you can play with kids, but never like go anywhere with them. Don't take the candy from the guy in the van. We have these real classic protocols to keep our kids safe. But the online world has physically removed our kids from, it's removed our kids from physical spaces, right? Where it almost seems, we have Megan's Law, right? I was talking to buddies at jiu-jitsu. They're like, look, if you look at Megan's Law, that's really terrifying, because now you find out proximity to predators, right? And it could be, a mile, could be 5 miles, could be wherever, right? And everybody knows the closer you are to some registered offender, sex offender, the worse it is, right? You don't want to be anywhere close to that. But the problem is you don't have that on social media. We understand physical nature of like, okay, this person lives 5 miles away and they look like this. Whereas you go on social media and you can get the exact same predator existing on Instagram or Snapchat or anything. He has no registration. He has no restrictions. And more than anything, no one actually knows who's behind the account because people engaging with individuals, blind individuals online. It's like, you don't know who's actually here, right? Like almost weekly, almost daily. In fact, I get, on Instagram, like I have to have an Instagram account for this podcast. I have these attractive looking women like, hey, Matt, like reaching out. It's like, you're like a Russian bot or something.
Right.
Like you just want my bank account. But I know that. This is the other problem that I think a lot of parents are encountering. Not only are we removing the risk from physical space that the parents can see, but their children are advancing through the digital world, through the virtual world far faster, and the parents can't follow them. And the children don't have the intuition or empirical evidence and experience to recognize, okay, the world is actually kind of out to get me. Not everyone, but there are enough people out there to get me that I should be really safe. So they're entering these unknown spaces where their parents can't monitor and can't follow, and they don't know enough to be scared and cautious.
Yeah, you really have to kind of look at your mindset of, yeah, we need to educate, basically what you're saying. Yeah. We need to educate kids on the dangers of these things. Right. We're missing the mark on, we need to educate parents on the avenues that these kids are taking to chat with people across the world and the nation, or even down the street. So just like you said, you can teach kids stranger danger, or, yeah, these are the dangers of the internet, blah, blah, blah. But they inherently love attention, and I think it's cool. Like, I can reach out and talk to these people and they have similar interest.
Right.
And meanwhile, the parents over here treading water. They have no idea what 5 of these apps on the phone are for, or that those are the avenues that they're using to get to my kids. That's where we're missing the mark, is parent education. And I don't know, I mean, there's a certain level of, I have a certain level of ignorance, right? But people, it's got to be a couple times a month somebody says, yeah, this app they're using to chat, I've never even heard of that. It moves so quickly. So I think educating the parents is where we need to focus. You should still do, I mean, you don't leave the kids in the dust, but definitely, we talked about driving a car, right? Okay, well, parents know, well, if they want to drive this big metal box, we need to teach them how to do it. But it's a singular thing right here in space, and it doesn't change rapidly, right? Right. The cars may change over time, but
the risks and the protocols
it's all the same.
Same,
right? And if you do have to adapt, you have plenty of time to do it. It's a slow adaptation.
Right.
Whereas technology with social media is rapid, fast, and ever changing. So parents have to really work to keep up.
Right. It's an interesting thing.
Yeah.
And again, something I've been working with a couple people on really specifically, and it's clear that at this point there's just this huge gaping hole
100%.
in education for people. Speaking of education for people, you and I talked last fall about the jail bond and what you were trying to do. And every time I talk to people about the jail bond, just saying, oh, there's this, because they knew I was talking to a bunch of people. They said, what do you think about the bond measure? And I said, well, I actually think it's a good thing. And I explained why. And they're like, yeah, honestly, let the criminals sleep on the floor. And what blew me away is it was clear instantaneously that people didn't really have an understanding of the distinction between a prison and a jail, right? And when I would tell them, like, okay, that the jail system is part of the legal system, right? Where we have somebody who's innocent until proven guilty and they need to be held. They are accused, right? Like 100% they're accused, but they're not convicted. And to treat people with an intentional low level of dignity as they're going through the judicial system, that's not appropriate. And just that one line, people are kind of like, oh, yeah, I guess you're right. It's like, look, if we got arrested for something, God forbid we ever get arrested and we go to jail and we're accused of something, or our kids get arrested or something like that, you still want a level of dignity and rights for that person. Now, look, you want to have an argument about the prison system. You have convicted people that are actually guilty that are serving 5 or 10 years, and you want their quality of life to not be a burden on the taxpayer. Okay, that's a different conversation, but the jail system is totally different. Like, can you just do a quick rundown on, look, what's the difference between the jail system and the prison system?
Yeah. real simple. The jail system, you think of the jail system almost as a holding pattern, right? Where it's a holding facility for the most part. Small fraction of people are serving time inside our jail. So you get arrested on the street for a misdemeanor or a felony. You come into the county jail and that's where you stay until your court case. If you don't make bond, then that's where you stay until your court case is over. If you get convicted of a misdemeanor, then you can get sentenced to jail for up to a year. Now, pretty rare. I mean, we've seen it, but pretty rare. And usually about 5% of our folks are serving time in the jail. And probably those people are in and out because we call them the weekend warriors that come in for a weekend and serve time so they can go out and maintain their jobs and their house payments and things.
It's wild that you have this duality where it's like, no, you still work at whatever job you're working at, and then you have to do jail time on the weekend, and they just like tick away 2 days at a time every week until their jail time is done.
Yep. I mean, we've seen people do it for months and months on end because they're like, well, I don't want to lose my job, so I'll stick with.
They have to serve 30 days or something.
Yeah, right. It's like I can't go to jail for a month and I can't make my house payment. Now I lose my house, I lose my job, I got fend for my family. So the judge gives them those options. We don't, as the sheriff's office, we're not allowed to say, well, we're going to let you do this. That's a judge option. But I mean, that's an option for people, right? Like, hey, yeah, your punishment is going to be jail time. So we have these alternative sentencing.
But again, that's very rare that somebody's actually serving their time in the jail system.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So on the other side of that is if you get convicted of a felony, then you go out to this state prison system. So in Idaho, that's statutorily, a felony doesn't keep you in the county jail. Once in a while, you'll have a judge that will sentence someone on a felony to a certain amount of time in the county jail. I'm not going to say it's rare, but it really doesn't happen that often, and it would still be a very small portion of our population. So, but that's the big thing. You're arrested for misdemeanor or a felony. You're held in the county jail until you are proven innocent or guilty. If you're innocent, you're out. If you're guilty, then if it's a misdemeanor, you can be made to serve time in the jail. If it's a felony, you go out to the prison and serve your time. So it's a holding facility, and people do get it mixed up. The state runs the prisons, the county runs the jail.
Gotcha. Yeah. Now, the bond that you guys were doing, and again, just because I talked to a lot of people and almost everybody didn't quite get this, the bond that you were running is like, look, we have an obligation to have a holding facility for our judicial system. And it is at well over capacity for what it was designed for. We've done all these upgrades. That's really what you guys were looking to do, which was just, hey, we need to upgrade the system that we're obligated to have. And we are not predominantly holding convicted criminals, either misdemeanors or felons. Like, that's not what it usually is. What it usually is people going through the court system. And again, they're innocent until proven guilty. So the idea of like, well, let's let them sleep on the floor and, eat nothing but breadcrumbs. Like, well, that's not really like a humane way to treat innocent men and women.
Right. And I kind of explained it a lot on the, trying to do that bond education was it's not good for anybody to have them do that. Right. So your taxpayer that says, I don't want to pay for any of that. Okay. They'll sleep on the floor. When they sleep on the floor, they get increasingly agitated, and there are more fights, more staff on staff. We don't. So more inmate on staff fights, more inmate on inmate fights. So in the long run, you're really not saving any money, because when these people are aggravated because they're sleeping on the floor and that guy breaks that guy's nose, the taxpayer's going to pay for it.
Sure,
they're just going to, because we have to pay for all their medical. They're in our care.
Sure.
I should really quickly say, by the way, 88% of the people that are in our jail are in for felonies. So it's not a bunch of DUIs. There's nobody in there on a marijuana charge that is sitting in our jail. And then the other part is, okay, you don't want to give them any cushy. Well, if you go look on whatever media site, I don't care who it is, go look on a media site, find some article on the jail. It always shows a picture of the dorms you'll see guys in red pajamas.
Sure.
In a dormitory setting, a big open dormitory setting. There's usually 100 people in there. And that's the picture they always use. That's the best place to live in the jail. Like, that is the cushiest place in the jail. These people, they don't have, your biggest accommodation is a plastic cup and a hot water spout so you can put instant coffee in it. That's a big deal. You live in the dorms, you get that, right? They're still sleeping on a metal bunk with a thin mattress, like it, and we don't do that to punish them, but that's institutionally how you have to run that for safety. So it's not like we're giving them like memory foam queen beds. It's just not how it works.
Right.
There's, I gave a tour to a group of people a couple of weeks ago, very much not been in the jail type of folks, not, not really all that familiar with law enforcement and those types of things, but they were there for a meeting. We had arranged, hey, how about we take you to the jail just for funsies, right?
Sure.
So, and they were like, they're looking at the dorms, the best place to live in the building. And they said, so they just live in here? Yep. They're in here 23 hours a day. They have an option to go out to a concrete rec yard so they can get some sun and those types of things. But so it's not cushy. It's not inhumane, but there's no Ritz-Carlton about it. And then when you put them on the floor, it's even worse. So people need to stop thinking that, oh, well, you're giving them too much, leeway to, no, that's not how it works. But we also don't want to give them bread and water, have them sleep on the floor, and then there's fights all the time. And that's how that's an unsafe facility. An unsafe facility equals higher rate of, medical bills for the taxpayers, increase risk of escape because you're too busy dealing with all these other problems, that the safety of your facility is, it goes down. So I can't get the argument where people just like, yep, sleep on the floor, bread and water. I just can't. I need them to come in there and see like, this is really how they live. And that's the way it goes.
Right. And you may not know this, but how many, like what % of people come into your jail system and then are released as like, they like drop the charges or they're not? Like,
I don't know that percentage.
Gotcha.
It'll be a low percentage, because
you guys do a good job.
We have good cops on the
identifying
street.
it.
I'm
Yeah,
not
sure.
talking about just the sheriff's office. Like
Right.
we have across this valley agencies that are making the right choices. So it's going to be a small percentage. But yeah, it does happen. And I don't know what that would be, what statistically that would be.
Right. And no matter what, even the people that do end up getting convicted, they are still innocent, right?
Yeah.
Until proven guilty.
Correct. And I think, anybody, you put it best when you're like, well, if it was me or my child or my nephew or whatever, you'd want them to be innocent until proven guilty as well. So,
And beyond that, like I have lots of friends who actually work in the jail system. I train jujitsu with them, and just recognizing it's like, look, if you make the inmates' lives harder, it's going to necessarily put the people working the jail system at risk. And like, I don't want my friends, like it's a risky job anyway. And they're coming to jiu-jitsu partially because they enjoy it, but also because they need to be able to defend themselves in a real world situation if something goes down, and they need to be hyper competent. So it's like, look, why make it worse for them? They certainly haven't done anything wrong, right? Like you're dealing with people in the jail system that are part of the sheriff's department, that are part of this whole mechanism of keeping the area safe. Why would we make their lives worse?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, when I worked in the jail, I mean, there are fights. You need to be physically fit and on your game mentally, because you have a whole population of people that are living there that don't want to live there. Right. And trying to maintain the law and order inside the facility can be trying. But yeah, why make their life harder to, I have injuries on me today or scars on me today from working in the jail and getting in physical altercations. And we want to make sure we reduce that as much as possible, because, we want to retain our employees and make sure that they are able to do their jobs, because you pack that place to the hilt and have all of those other problems. It's harder to do your actual job of keeping the staff safe, keeping the inmates safe, and making sure that, we're fulfilling our obligation to the public.
Yeah. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
There was another question that I actually wanted to ask you about the jail system in general. I
Mhm.
had read some things. Now we live in a predominantly Caucasian area,
Mhm.
right? And I had read some things that were saying like, oh, there's this swelling of minorities in the jail system. And even like a cursory inspection of this, I found out actually that the jail system in general, especially as it pertains to minorities, is actually very seasonal.
Mhm.
And I
Here,
was like,
yeah.
how is that possible? Could you explain that to me?
So yeah,
Because like a seasonal minority representation in a jail system just doesn't seem like something that's possible.
it sounds strange, but we do have, especially because we're Idaho and we're considered a rural state, we're an agricultural state. So a lot of people come here from out of state to try and take advantage of that. Especially in this part of the state, they are rudely awakened when we catch them committing crimes. So uh, usually from bigger cities, we have these group of criminals that will come here and commit fraud and burglary, and then move to the next town. They'll really work their way kind of through a number of states. So wintertime, it's a little bit lower, right? Because nobody wants to really come to Idaho in the wintertime.
And these gangs are necessarily traveling. Like that's the
Yes.
point. They have to travel to get here because they're not actually
Correct.
representing the population of this county.
Correct. Yep. And they come from they're usually not from a Caucasian background. So they come in and sometimes they're from other countries, and they'll come in and do a bunch of burglaries and fraud, like I said. And we end up catching them, not all the time, but we catch them at a pretty good success rate. Well, when they come from states like California, you can hear on the jail phone calls where they're baffled that I might go to prison. Yeah, well, you broke into all these people's homes and stole their property. And well, here in Idaho, that still means something, right?
Right.
And so they're baffled, like, well, geez, in California, I'd be out in a day out on, my own recognizance. But they think that when they come here. So they look at us as some hayseeds and they come start trying to victimize us, and then we catch them. But it does up our population as far as different ethnic backgrounds. But it's still very small. Like when you're looking, I'm not a statistics guy as far as, I'm not a professor.
Sure.
But when you have small numbers like that of different ethnic backgrounds that are in the jail, because it is overwhelmingly Caucasian. I mean,
Sure.
it's a bunch of white people in the jail, a lot. Well, when you have a small population and you throw a couple of numbers in there, percentage wise, the fluctuation is huge.
Right. Like if you have 5 people of a minority background and that's representative of the population of Ada County,
Mhm.
if you go from 5 people to say like 8 people, like you catch
Mhm.
3 guys,
Yeah.
then you have a 60% increase in minority
Yeah.
based on compared to what it was before and over the population. So it's like you just add 5 guys, you're like, okay, you're 100% greater than the representative population in the area.
Yeah, it becomes very disproportionate.
Mm.
And I remember, I talked about it with some media agency a couple of years ago about that. And again, I'm not a statistical professor, but I got to think that's got something to do with it because it's such a small population. But I mean, there could be other factors out there. I don't know what they are. In my professional opinion, having worked on the street, been out there, worked with every agency in this valley, and seeing the work that they do and knowing the work that I do, I always say, well, I don't know what's in their hearts and minds, but I physically see them acting appropriately and making the appropriate decisions when they're dealing with someone who's committing crimes, whether they're going to cite or arrest or whatever.
Right.
So that's all I can say about it. So I don't know always why that statistic is disproportionate. We have some of the things that I've talked about here definitely that contribute. But I think we probably need to look more into it.
Yeah, sure. And again,
Sure.
just understanding that one nuance, it kind of opens your mind to, okay, there are so many factors here that I want
Yeah.
to consider. And again, just explaining the seasonal representation, like,
Yeah.
like that seems like to a layperson that seems impossible. But
Right.
what you say makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and we've dealt with it forever. I mean, when I was a street cop, summertime's coming, so we're gonna have a bunch of these door-to-door salesmen that come here from Florida, and so now we're gonna have burglaries and things like that, because that's what they would disguise themselves as.
That's something that's actually been going on a lot in the community that people are really concerned about. So the scam is essentially you have somebody who's like, oh, I want to sell you internet service, right? And
Mm-hmm.
under the guise of selling you internet service, they go up to the house, knock on the door,
Yeah.
and essentially case it to figure out, okay, is somebody existing here right now, right? Are they home, whatever? And that person may leave, and then behind them comes the actual burglars,
Mm-hmm.
which jump the fence, go in through the back door or something. But you have the face of it, which is the guy casing the area, and then you have the crew behind it. Was like, okay, go to 2780,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yep. And that's that's the reason that if you're doing door-to-door sales anywhere in Ada County, whether it's in a city or unincorporated, you have to have a permit to do it. And that's the reason. I mean, we want legitimate people that that we can say, oh, these people are actually selling a product versus, hey, this is a van full of people from, from New York that are going door to door selling some weird cleaning supplies that nobody's ever heard of, and they're not licensed. So we need to look into them. And I'm not saying that every door to door person is is a criminal.
I
Look at,
appreciate, yeah.
but in today's world, how many door to door salesmen really are there? So
When we have Amazon Prime,
exactly.
when we have Amazon Prime.
I mean, think about it. Every American probably now, when someone knocks on their door, they're like, why is
Right.
someone knocking on my door?
What for the homeowner that experiences this, what's the best practice? Should it be if you realize somebody's trying to sell you something, have them identify themselves and
Yep.
supply evidence of a permit immediately?
Yep, they have to have it showing, so it usually needs to be worn around their neck
So
or
they have like a
clipped on it.
lanyard or
Yep.
something like, hey,
Yep.
I'm Matt with Solar
Yep.
Company.
So best practice is, let me see your permit, your sales permit, and if they don't have one, I tell them, well, I'm going to call the police then because you're supposed to have a permit, and that will scurry them away for sure. But yeah, ask them to see the permit. If they don't have it, it's bogus. Call in, or at least that'll get them off your porch.
Gotcha. And a lot of people are utilizing those Ring cameras because when somebody rings the doorbell, even if they're not home, they can respond as if they are, like, yes, what
Yep.
do you need? And you have a brief exchange with the individual and just say, yeah, I'm not coming to the door, go away.
Yeah, and that's a piece of technology that's certainly helped us over the years. Once we had people just having Ring doorbell cameras, those calls go down, right? Because they're going to look and go, well, I can see it right there, so I'm not even going to those people's house, and so we'll move on through the neighborhood.
Gotcha. Gotcha. There has been a lot of talk about the sheriff's office, and this was a distinction that was made to me last year. Like, listen, it's not the sheriff's department, it's the sheriff's office because the sheriff is elected. And there has been a lot of conversation about obligations and who the sheriff actually works for. Now, yes, all public employees, I think there's an argument. It's like, hey, you work for me as a citizen, I pay taxes, be that the chief of police or the sheriff or the fire captain or whoever, right? Fine. But there's another layer of obligation and commitment that comes along with a sheriff's office because you are constitutionally required to exist and people vote you in. So Eagle could not have a police department, but there would still be a sheriff in the area. Because of that, people talk about the constitutional nature, the obligation to the Idaho Constitution, the United States Constitution, and your commitment to that. Can you help me understand that a little bit?
Yeah, and I always preface this with, hey, we have great police departments here. I don't want to say that I'm disparaging them at all, because when I start talking about this, it can sometimes sound like that, but fantastic police chiefs here, fantastic departments across the valley. They're awesome. The friends of mine, I have friends in about every agency across the valley. So, but the difference is, police chief is appointed by the mayor, who is the elected official. The sheriff is the elected official. So, constitutionally, the people choose who gets to be the sheriff. The police chief, people do not get to choose who gets to be the police chief. Now, along with that, the constitutional requirements are that the sheriff must exist, right? So Boise City tomorrow could say, we don't want a police department anymore because our laws say that the police department is allowed to exist, but the sheriff must exist. So if all the Boise Police Department leaves tomorrow, the sheriff's office has to move in to maintain law and order, and that's in our Constitution. And there are a lot of statutory obligations for the sheriff very few for any municipal police department. So when you look at it that way, you look at basically the prosecutor and the sheriff are your quote unquote highest forms of law enforcement.
Sure.
Doesn't mean that I'm in charge of the police chiefs. That's not what that means. But it does mean that we're the only elected law enforcement officials that have to report directly to the constituent, right?
Sure.
So your police chief reports directly to the mayor, and your sheriff is responsible to the constituents that voted them in. Along with that, usually sheriffs are turned to historically, especially in the West. Sometimes sheriffs in other parts of, especially like the East and the Northeast, they have a little bit different role. But in the West and the South, Southwest, sheriffs are turned to as a form of kind of protection from things that are unconstitutional, which usually turns to the federal government, right? And I think sheriffs in general usually do a pretty good balance of, well, I'm not going to walk around poking the federal government in the eye, but they should know where you stand according to your constituents and what you'll tolerate and what you won't. Now, you're not the police of the federal government, but you should maintain what your community expects, because you're put here by the community. You're not appointed by someone else.
Sure.
If I don't know if I rambled too much on that one, but
No. You're good, because the obligation is, somebody presented this to me and they were talking about a constitutional sheriff. I'm like, okay, what does that mean? And this person said it means that the sheriff recognizes the obligation to the constituents and to uphold the Constitution, even in the face of pressure from the federal government. And this became really evident, obviously, over the last few years with COVID and whatnot, where populations are saying, hey, this is wrong. And sheriff offices had to make a decision of, okay, I'm either going to do what the federal government wants me to do and like kick people off the beaches and, get mad at them for having barbecues in their backyard, or I'm going to recognize that I serve the Constitution of these constituents and not whatever hyper ephemeral policies are running through the federal government.
Yeah, and I think especially in the West, there were a lot, not all, but a lot of sheriffs who, turn to their constituents, or maybe not turn to them, but understand what their constituents want,
right,
and went down that road. That's kind of what I mean by the, making sure the federal government kind of knows where you stand. Here, we did a good job of it as far as the sheriff's office. I wasn't the sheriff at that time. I was the chief in Eagle, and I was pretty happy that the sheriff and I had that same view of, yeah, we're not the COVID police. We're just not. We're not. And it's the same with the state of Idaho. I don't want to poke anybody in the eye, but
Sure.
but we're also not going to enforce laws that aren't really laws. We're here. The laws that the legislators make, those are the laws we enforce, and the judiciary decides whether or not they're constitutional or not. Now, what's nice about a sheriff is, because we're elected by the people, and we kind of have a little bit more, I don't know if I want to say more perspective. That's not right either. But a lot of times sheriffs can look at laws and say, I don't think this is going to be constitutional. And then hopefully you have a good relationship with your prosecutor, who is the other elected law enforcement official, like Jan Bennett's. She's the elected prosecutor for Ada County. If I see a law, and I don't have an example right now, but if I see a law that I think is, hey, this is not going to be constitutional, I don't think we can enforce this, so we're not going to do that right now, I can go to Jan, and then we can come together and then go to the judiciary and say, this is not constitutional. The AG needs to look at this a little harder, something like that. So as a sheriff, you have a little more leeway to do that, to make sure that the rights of your constituents are being upheld.
Which is really the backstop, right? Like, this is what you're here for. You're here to protect people against others, foreign or domestic, that would infringe upon their constitutional rights.
Yes, and the reverse is true as well. When you look at something and say, yeah, I don't like that law, it's not, you don't necessarily have all the power to say, we're just not going to enforce it, period. Now, that's not right either. The legislator, there are three forms of government, and the legislation made those laws So it is your obligation to enforce them, and then the judiciary to make sure that you did it right or it's constitutional. So it works both ways, right? You can't just be a sheriff and decide, I just don't like these laws, so we're not going to enforce them. That's also not the right way to go. There are different routes that you can take to involve the judiciary so that you can get it done right. That's why we have the three forms of government we do. So there are checks and balances. So you're not Judge Dredd walking around deciding, oh, this is what's going to be right and what's going to be wrong. Great example today. I'm going to go testify down at the Capitol building on the fentanyl bill that's coming out. That's my role as the constitutional sheriff, to go and try and influence the legislators to say, this is good, this is bad, this is, you really need to look. I don't think this is constitutional. It's unenforceable. It is enforceable. So that's my role that way, not to stand by and go, well, I don't like it, so I'm just not going to enforce it.
So you're really the legal aspect of, look, from a law enforcement standpoint, you can't write this law because it won't be enforceable. So even if we arrest a bunch of people, nothing's going to stick, or this will work, or this almost is good, but you got to take out this last piece.
Yes.
So again, you're the constitutional reference that they need to look to.
Correct. And honestly, we still have a lot of support from the police chiefs on that, right? Like, we work kind of as a team to make sure that those things are going forward. But yes, now they don't always listen. It's their choice. I can't make them vote one way or another, but it is my obligation to say, all right, what bill is this? How does this affect public safety? Just what you said.
Sure.
Is this even enforceable? Is this constitution that we can't do this because maybe, and maybe the legislators just didn't understand at the time, but this infringes on people's rights. You can't make a law like that. Again, they don't have to listen. And sometimes we work really well together and sometimes we don't. That's politics, right?
Sure.
But yeah, I think as a sheriff, as an elected sheriff, you have the obligation to, represent your constituents when it comes to laws that are being made, right?
Yeah.
I don't get to decide what laws are made and what laws aren't, but I should be able to I at least have the constituents' voice to say, here's my expert opinion as the law enforcement agent for the county.
Yeah. Gotcha. Speaking of fentanyl, there has been a lot of, which I really don't understand. There has been an incredible amount of pushback against the fentanyl bill that would, predominantly make mandatory minimums for fentanyl trafficking.
Yeah.
Right. So we're talking about dealers and traffickers. This bill is not going after the user, and that is a horrible situation, and the users need to get help. Absolutely. But this bill is looking at increasing the robust law enforcement punishment legal system punishment to traffickers and dealers, right? You have mandatory minimums. You're charging people with murder. If I'm a dealer, I give you some fentanyl, you pass away, you die from an overdose, I get charged with murder. Like there are all these things. And amazingly, people have really made this about, the analogies like the crack epidemic and how, in the 80s, a lot of people went to jail for not dealing crack, but users, right? And that's not what it is. So what are your thoughts? Do you feel like this bill is written in a manner, you're going to testify this afternoon, and this will go out afterwards, so that's good. Yeah. But do you feel that this bill is written in an enforceable, effective manner? And do you think that having things like mandatory minimums for fentanyl and murder charges for dealers in the event that the user dies, do you think those would be effective deterrents and mechanisms to stop this?
I do think they are effective mechanisms and deterrents. We've said kind of over and over, I always say it sounds kind of Miami Vice, but we do know that the cartels that supply everything up from the border into Idaho, they watch and listen to the different laws, different states, different areas, so they know where to avoid. And that's what the mandatory minimum does, say, if you're going to come here and deal drugs and traffic drugs, then you will go to prison for a long time. Now, like you said, the user is not included in that. That's why you have the amounts are high, right? To say, well, if you have 4 grams of fentanyl, that's like 2,000 doses, so that's That's not your user who.
Or something like 500 pills, or
Yeah,
just some
right.
really huge number.
So that's why it's a big number, to say it's not a user amount. You're obviously trafficking and most likely selling those types of things. So that is who it's aimed at. There is always this misinformation that people are being scooped up. People get arrested for possession. They do. They just do. But you look at the people that are in prison. The IDOC director himself said it on the record early on in the session, anybody that's arrested out as in the prison that is a user and got arrested for possession probably has a lot of other factors attached to that sentence, as far as we tried to help you, you failed out of this program, failed out of that program, you've got a giant history of all these things. He himself acknowledged that, and that's usually what that is. You don't have a guy that gets picked up for a gram of meth and he goes to prison. That doesn't work like that. We recognize, hey, users need help, and you can't help all of them, but you should try and help all of them. And those people that are willing to take the help, that's a success. Mandatory minimums are for people that have large quantities. They're obviously here to sell to our population, poison our kids, poison our community, and it's a good deterrent. Some of the really weird conversations, I thought, at 4 hours of testimony for the committee that was going through. Okay, they kept going back to this. Oh, well, I got 5 kids at a party, and one of them got some pills, and they have fentanyl in them, and one of these kids drops dead. So now you're going to charge the other kid with murder? No, this is for traffickers and dealers, right? That's not what that kid is, and it's easy for us to identify that and say, no, we're looking for the guy that supplied those kids.
So it's not even the first chain. It's not the first chain of possession. So say I go to a party and I have 3 pills of fentanyl, right? Or something with fentanyl in it, and I give you one and I give Johnny one. Mm-hmm. You drop dead. Horrible. I'm not getting charged. Like, it's not good for me, but I'm not getting charged with murder. They're like, okay, Matt, where did you get those? Yes. That's the person that we're going to charge with murder. And by the way, we're not happy with you. I don't know what happens in that case, but that's that's not the scope of this bill anyway, right? Correct. Like the 17-year-old who gives another 17-year-old if they weren't, actually dealing.
Right. Correct. Just in the same way as, like, if you went, guy's got an ounce of weed and, at a high school party, sure, and he's like, yeah, here, have some. That's not dealing, right? That's not what we're looking for. We want to know where your ounce of weed came from, right? And I'm just simplifying it down to that.
And then eventually at some point of possession, it's like, okay, this person is clearly a dealer. Like, they have clear supply, they have clear intent, they have clear all blah, blah, blah.
And, one of the things, it's strange. I think a lot of people, again, and I said this in our block training today, there are a lot of folks that don't really understand, and for all kinds of reasons, that don't understand really how investigations go and law enforcement actually works, because we don't just go, oh, well, that kid gave that kid a pill, so send him to prison. No, there's an investigation that goes on. One of the representatives asked me during the last testimony, said, well, why don't you include, it was kind of like this situational information into the code. And I told him, I said, our laws are not meant to tell you a story, right? It's a starting point for, all right, is this person able to be charged? We're the one that needs to tell you the story through our investigation. We look at the totality of the circumstances, and we figure out, okay, this law, it now does apply. Here's why. And then it goes to a prosecutor who looks and basically double and triple checks it to say, I think it does apply, or you know what, I don't think it is, and charges can get amended. And then it goes to the judicial, and judges look at it, and more attorneys look at it, and then jurors look at it. And a lot of that got a little bit misconstrued of like, oh, this new fentanyl bill, we're just giving police the ability to make these decisions. Yeah, you do that with every law in Idaho and every mandatory minimum that's on the books right now.
Right. We do it with heroin. Yeah. Why are you fighting doing it with fentanyl? It doesn't make sense. We have existing laws for mandatory minimums already that function very effectively.
Yeah. And I think they don't realize so here's a great example. This is the example I gave while I was testifying. Back when I was a sergeant on the road, I head to, it's supposed to be a DUI call, find this guy. He's actually getting ready to shoot up heroin in his car, pull him out, do the investigation like you should. And he has a trafficking amount of heroin with him. Now heroin is very small amounts because a very small amount can go a long way. And he had a trafficking amount. Well, I need to investigate that, right? And through my investigation, I find he came here from California, relocated, knowing that California's laws are so lax, I can buy a ton of heroin and it'll last me in Idaho for a little while because it's more expensive here because the laws are stricter. So I'm relocating, so I'll buy a bunch. It wasn't this extravagant amount, but it's a lot for a user. It's quite a bit. I'll buy a bunch so I can relocate and then use that up. And actually, interviewing him, and I believe him. He was like, I figured I'll use this up and then I might just try and get some help, right? He was actually a fairly normal dude. The rest, the whole incident's burned in my brain. Does he go to prison for trafficking? No, he doesn't need to go to prison for trafficking. The investigation tells you, all right, he meets the qualifications, but look at what else is over here. And the prosecutor can decide, yeah, you're right. This guy needs some help, right? He's not getting off the hook for the possession because that's still illegal. But that's a good example of how we work as law enforcement. There are very few things that are black and white, and we don't want stories written into our laws, right? Speeding. This is another example I gave. All right. So in Idaho, it is against the law to drive above the posted speed limit. But it doesn't say, but if your wife's in labor and you're trying to get to the hospital, it's okay.
Right.
But if a cop pulls you over and your wife's having a baby next to you and you were speeding, you're not going to get a ticket, right? I mean, that's the simplification of how we make decisions, right? We do have discretion and we have some decisions that we can make. And there are checks and balances down the road that can decide if we were right or wrong through the prosecutors, through judges, and so forth.
Right. There was to that end, a guy in my neighborhood had his kids. He's an older guy. He had his kids and his grandkids over the holiday, and he said they were coming back from something. The grandkids are melting down, just losing it, and he's coming up 55, trying to get back to the neighborhood. And he said he got pulled over by a law enforcement agent of a department that will go unnamed. And this law enforcement agent walked up to the car and he had his, my buddy had his, license, registration already. And the guy looks in the car and realizes what's going on and literally takes out of his pocket a $20 gift card for a coffee shop. And he's like, get home fast. And I hope you get some time for yourself. I was so blown away. And my friend couldn't believe it. Like, I literally thought I was getting a ticket and I walked away with a $20 gift card to like Joe Vino's or something. And he actually went out. He's like, I am self-finding myself. And he bought, like $100 worth of gift cards to Joe Vino's or something.
Right,
It was
right.
like giving them out to people. But it's that kind of discretion where you have people that are capable of making calls, right? And some people get very upset because like, well, how come that didn't happen to me? How come this person wasn't really nice? Okay, you got to take the totality of the situation. And if you have somebody who has like 3 screaming grandkids in the back, to have the amount of grace and compassion, like, okay, look, this is a bad situation. Obviously, you're trying to get home, right? And move on from that. That's a beautiful thing. I think we want that in our law enforcement community. If you write into the laws a story that must be adhered to with all of these things, one, you'll never get all of the different nuances and stories in there, right? So if we start writing in one particular situation, in the absence of every other possible situation that would necessitate either leniency or conviction, well, now we've screwed up the law, right? Because we haven't put it in the law enforcement's hands to actually do their job and figure out, okay, what based on my experience is actually going on here.
Yeah, correct. I mean, and I think it's important to say we don't always get it right either. That's why we're not Judge Dredd, right? So, you're going to prison, period. No, there's a prosecutor that reviews these. There's a judge that reviews these. And then you go in front of a jury to prove it. So, but I agree with you, right? We need people that recognize what's happening here. Right. What is the real story here? I have the code. Does it meet the code? Yes. But you know what? I'm going to frame the whole story of everything that came out in my investigation, and I'm going to send that to the prosecutor. and say, these are the charges I made these charges because this is the rest of the story. And I mean,
Right.
there's a billion, examples of that, but a local media outlet took my little snippet that we just talked about and said, "Oh my God, we're giving all this power to the police to decide these things." Yeah, we do that every single day on just about every call for service. How do you not know that? That's why we have so much training and so much equipment, and it's so expensive because you have to have the right people making those decisions. Otherwise, we'd just be robots running around, right? Like, okay, give me your ID, punch a little thing, and here's your ticket. People don't want that.
Yeah, but that's just the media engine,
Yeah, yeah,
right? Like that's I actually very funny. I don't hang out and like post on Facebook, but I do go on there. There are part of different groups I post my podcasts on, and sometimes I look on and say, hey, what's actually going on in Meridian? What's going on in Caldwell? Things of that nature.
yeah,
And there's one guy who works for a very well-known media outlet that had gone onto Facebook and was like, hey guys, does anybody have any stories or news stuff that needs to be covered? Because this guy has a quota of
yeah,
news stuff that like he has to produce these stories and he has to come out and like find things to talk about. Like you're literally just putting out like like an APB or something
yeah,
on feels like, tell me something that's like news. Like, yeah, man, they need something to write about and
yeah,
they need people to be compelled to listen. And what better than, hey, we are giving undue power to our law enforcement agents. We're making a riskier place. They're a danger to us. All these things, like that's a narrative that people just eat up.
yeah. They do, and they run with it, right? I mean,
Right.
I we put so much time and energy into legal updates, ethics, hiring. It starts with hiring, right? We hire people. I tell them all the time, we hire people. We hire people, not
Right.
resumes.
Right.
I mean, I have a bunch of stories about, man, look at this. Wow, this person, whew, they're going to rock it here. And you get in a oral board with them like, no, this is not how they are not going to, they're not going to do business like we do business with the public in the way that the public likes. So you got to, it starts with hiring, and then all the training, all the equipment. Like the public expects a lot of us. And I think they don't realize how much we actually do in the form of decision making every single day. So that's why when I see oh my God, we're giving the cops all this power to, no, it's it's the same as all these other drugs. And B, you do that with every single law. Every single law you've written gives us a guideline to, this is what is considered against the law. Is that really what you have here? And even when it's technically yes, all right, write everything you have and send it along to another set of eyes to say, to say whether it's right or wrong. So there are plenty of times where you'll be at a situation and you realize, okay, well, this is technically against this law, so I need to write it and explain that and explain the totality. And we're not going to make an arrest today. We're just going to route this to the prosecutor for a second opinion to say, what do you think about this from the legal standpoint as an attorney, as the elected, attorney for the county. We didn't arrest them, but we can go back later and arrest them for a warrant. And then the prosecutors will look at it and go, yeah, we see what's going on here. I don't think that's a good idea.
It's not going to stick.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a good idea. So I mean, there's all these checks and balances. It's just not us running amok, scooping people up and throwing them in jail.
Right.
It's just there's a lot of things that go into human beings and what they do. It'd be easier if we were robots, right? Because all we gotta do is say, well, the robot makes this decision. I don't know. This is the algorithm we wrote.
Right. Well, I think that'd be a little awkward, but
It would be really weird, right?
Sharon, listen, I've had you here for a while. I really appreciate you coming in. Is there anything, and again, we didn't really have a huge plan of things to talk about,
Right.
but is there anything that you would like to say? Because again, I know you got to get on with your day here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have to do kind of the public plug of, we talk every single day, including today, this morning, when we talked to our patrol team at a big training, of how luckily we are here because people in this community support us. That's a big deal. And those people that came from other places understand what I'm talking about, where as long as we keep making the right decisions and then fessing up for the wrong ones and trying to improve ourselves and keep moving forward, I think the community will continue to support us. So it's pretty amazing place to work as a law enforcement officer. So I appreciate all them. I mean, it seems like it's the politician thing you're supposed to do is thank the public, but man, we're lucky. I talk to people from all over the nation, and we are luckier than most to be living here.
That's awesome. Well, again, I appreciate everything you do, and I know my community does as well. We're served, I believe, exclusively by the Ada County Sheriff Department,
Yes.
Sheriff's Office. So, yeah, we appreciate you too. So, thanks for coming in, and be safe.
Yeah, thank you.
This podcast is brought to you by MTU Studios. If you're looking to start a podcast or need content for your business or personal use, content of any type, please reach out to MTU Studios. MTUstudios.com. We'd love to help.